Hi all, a new day and new stories from Ocean Story. Just listen to this story. It was the day after graduation when my mom and her new boyfriend informed me that now that I was an adult, I had to move out and find my own place. This was unexpected as our relationship with my mom had changed drastically after he moved in with us. I tried to make a good impression because I wanted my mom to be happy. However, her boyfriend seemed to have his own issues with me. He convinced my mom to start charging me rent, even though he himself was unemployed and living off my income. The situation escalated when he started entering my room, going through my belongings and using them without my permission. He even broke my laptop using it without asking, but my mother saw nothing wrong in his behavior and always took his side. Every time I complained about his invasion of my privacy, my mom would yell at me. He seemed pleased with himself when my mom made the decision to kick me out. I didn't have enough money to rent my own place, so I was forced to survive by sleeping on friends' couches until they got tired of me, and sometimes I even had to sleep outside. Luckily, through an acquaintance, I was able to find a second job and started saving money. I moved to a new place earlier this month, after months of wandering and uncertainty. A few days ago, my mom's boyfriend called me, informing me that my mom had had a stroke. He tried to talk me into coming home to help her since he had a job opportunity elsewhere and would have to move. I refused and told him I was too busy building my own life and couldn't afford any distractions, then hung up the phone. I was plagued with doubts as to whether I was an idiot for refusing to come home to take care of my sick mom, who along with her boyfriend kicked me out. I was so busy surviving that I didn't even think about blocking them out. In the back of my mind, I had a faint hope that my mom would change her mind and let me come back, but they had never contacted me before this incident. It's hard to reconcile the idea that it's a terrible thing for a mom to suffer the consequences of her decisions. But it's also a lesson to me that parents need to be more attentive and caring. I don't feel like I have to run to the rescue because my mom showed her priorities by leaving me to fend for myself for her boyfriend. She should have made sure he was a decent man before leaving her child behind. Now that she's had a stroke, I don't feel guilty because she made it clear that she wouldn't make sacrifices for me. You shouldn't treat people like family unless they themselves are willing to do that for you. Next story. In my 34 years, I work in a physically demanding field where my coworkers and I are both physically fit people, most with similar physiques. My wife, a 32-year-old woman, has always been larger. I met her when she was already overweight. We were together when she was pudgy, and we got married in her same shape. She is conscious of her weight, and I think she is incredibly beautiful. I will be happy if she loses weight, but also happy if she stays the way she is. In my eyes, she is the most beautiful woman in the world. One of my coworkers, 28-year-old Julia, often says that she thinks she is too pudgy for love and that pudgy people don't deserve love. In fact, Julia is not actually obese. She weighs about 120 pounds and works out 5 times a week, barely allowing herself to eat. When she expressed these thoughts, I told her it wasn't true, citing my wife as an example. Julia took my words negatively, stating that I should not call my wife fat and that it was offensive. She argued that my wife is beautiful and has a lush shape. Carol, my wife, does not like to be called shapely as she believes it is just an evasive way of not calling someone fat. In our society, unfortunately, the word is often used as an insult. When I explained this to Julia, she started threatening to tell my wife that I had called her fat. She took out her phone, opened Instagram, and claimed to have texted my wife Carol, reporting my rude behavior. I got ahead of her and called Carol, putting the conversation on speakerphone. I asked Carol if she considered herself shapely or fat, to which she laughed and replied that she hated that shapely stuff. She was fat and beautiful. I thanked her, told her I loved her, and hung up. As soon as I ended the conversation, Julia flew into a rage. She started screaming, claiming that I was insulting my wife and that I was forcing my acceptance of the word fat on her to maintain her self-esteem and to keep her close to me. In her opinion, no sane woman could accept such treatment. Today, I received an email from HR asking for a meeting. I don't think it's serious, since my wife has a blog about body positivity and I could easily call her as a witness. But the atmosphere at work has cooled, and Julia keeps throwing dirty looks at me and ignoring me if we end up in the same room. I scratch the back of my head puzzled, wondering if I'm an idiot for calling my wife fat. What on earth could Julia have reported to HR? That she's stalking my wife who doesn't even work with me. What I say to my wife is no one else's business. Hell, Julia should stay out of my personal life. You should no doubt complain to Julia for creating a hostile work environment. You're not an idiot and your wife sounds like a lovely person. Julia should probably find some other hobby, as she clearly doesn't know how to take compliments and was shocked when she didn't get any. If you run into problems in HR, remember that fat is not a protected class in many states except Michigan, and you didn't call Julia fat, nor is your wife your coworker. While I'm not a lawyer, you probably have grounds for a complaint against Julia for creating a toxic work environment. It always annoys me when people use phrases like that. For example, if one of my friends is constantly complaining about their looks, saying they are ugly, I sometimes agree with them to show the absurdity of what they are saying. It usually pisses them right off. I understand when someone is having a rough day and needs support, but constant self-critical comments can be annoying and obvious. Like in Julia's case, it's obvious that a 120-pound person can't be fat unless they are about 3 feet tall. I wonder what makes Julia so bossy and insecure. I wonder why she can't find someone she wants to date. It doesn't seem to be her looks that repels people, but rather her personality. Now I want to tell a different story. I, a 31-year-old male, was raised by my older sister. Until I was 8 years old, I lived with my mom, but when my grandmother got sick, my mom made me and my 10-year-old brother stay with my sister, who was 21 at the time, so she could take care of her mother. My mom's return 2 years later did not change our situation. My brother and I continued to live with my sister, as my mom did not have a big enough house. Mom still visited us often, and even when I met my future wife at age 22, I still lived with my sister. I love my mom, she's a wonderful woman, but from an outsider's perspective, it can seem like she abandoned me and was not involved in my upbringing, relying on others. I, on the one hand, can understand why someone might think that, but on the other hand, I also understand the reasons why my mom acted the way she did. My wife, however, looks at it differently. She sees my mom's actions as a disregard for her parental responsibilities, and she especially resents it when my mom comes over to our house and starts giving us advice on how to raise our children. This seriously irritates my wife, who thinks my mom should stay out of parenting issues, considering she hasn't even raised her own children. I agree that mom should enforce boundaries, and I don't mind telling her that. But the claim that she wasn't involved in raising her children seems wrong to me. She was still around despite the circumstances. We really didn't live with my mom or have sleepovers, while my wife grew up with a difficult upbringing. She was the eldest of 6 children, while I was the youngest of 4. At a young age, my wife had to take on the role of raising her siblings while her mom worked. And by the time she was 15, she even had to get a job to help the family pay the bills. This caused her to have a deep resentment towards her mother for her stolen childhood. This upbringing is what shaped her attitude towards my mom. She believes my mom did even worse, leaving me at my sister's doorstep and not showing up for 2 years, and then never taking me back, even when she had the opportunity. At least her mom, though she made her work and help around the house, was always there for her. My wife thinks what my mom did was worse, despite her adversarial relationship with her own mother. She also sympathizes with my sister, who lost her youth and her marriage because of the obligations imposed by my mother. My sister got married just as my mom had to stay with her, and they divorced a year later because her husband was not ready to have children. I now have 2 adopted children, and that was the reason for the argument that broke out yesterday. I approached my wife to ask if her mother could take our children away for 1 or 2 weeks so we could get some rest. The tension in the house was building and the kids were becoming more and more active, pulling us from our last strength. But my wife flatly refused, saying that you can't just send your kids to someone else when you're a parent. I tried to explain to her that it wasn't just me who needed the break, but our whole family. She, however, replied that she understood how I felt about giving my kids away to someone else for an extended period of time, but that it wasn't okay, and she wasn't going to force her mom to take the kids away so I could avoid interacting with them. To which I strongly objected and told her to stop talking about my mom. This caused her anger, and she warned me that if I told her to shut up one more time, I would leave this house. I realized that I was wrong to tell her to shut up and stop talking about my mom. My wife doesn't just mention my mom, she starts complaining about her when my mom tries to interfere with our children's upbringing or when I suggest we send the kids to her mom's house for a while. Since we recently had a baby, my mom has become more active in giving parenting advice, which often pisses my wife off. I try to tell my mom to stay out of it. I regularly tell my mother that my wife and I are following our own parenting plan and value her opinion, but insist that no additional advice is needed. I have no interest in creating a situation where our child spends time with my mother. I prefer that only the two older children spend time with her, giving us a break. My wife has regularly attended therapy twice a week since we met, which has helped her mend her relationship with her own mother. She acknowledges that her mother's actions were imperfect, but also points out that my inability to see the errors in my mother's actions affects me as a person and a man. She criticizes my unwillingness to acknowledge the flaws in my mother's behavior, such as when she tries to convince us to use a strict parenting method because she believes our child is manipulating us. I try to treat my mother's advice with respect, thanking her, but then explaining that we do not believe in such methods. My wife thinks I should get therapy so I can wipe my eyes and stop putting my mom on a pedestal. She argues that it is my sister, with whom I am very close, who deserves our respect and appreciation, not my mother. Nevertheless, I love my mother and think she is a wonderful woman. I do not agree that she deserves to be neglected as my wife believes. She is an important part of my life, and I am confident in her value as a mother. As I entered the church with my 4 teenagers, one of the fathers standing nearby decided to share with me his views on parenting. His own children were facing serious challenges. One was in rehab for the 4th time, and another had a second child at age 19. I couldn't resist a curt response and told him to go to hell. At that moment, I realized that my wife has similar feelings when my mother gives her parenting advice. My wife apparently feels as frustrated and depressed as I did at that moment in church. She always complains about my mom's advice, just as I complain about her instruction. My wife and I try to raise the kids ourselves, but my mom won't stop stepping in with her advice, and when we try to send the kids to her for a couple weeks for respite care, she complains. It seems odd that other people should be responsible for your kids for the weekend so you can rest. Yes, I can be a mommy's little trooper, but I don't want it to look like I'm desperately seeking my mom's approval. If I recognize that my mother constantly crosses the boundaries set by me and my wife by giving unwanted advice, I should stand up for our rules. However, when I yelled at my stressed-out postpartum wife to shut up, it was the wrong decision. Seriously, I was an idiot. Maybe I really should rethink my attitude and seek professional help to better understand and respect boundaries in our family relationship. Live in denial all you want, but your wife sees and understands much more than you can imagine. She takes your sister's perspective on your childhood, realizing the depth of the damage your mother did to you and your siblings. It is quite disturbing that after repeated requests to keep her advice to herself, your mother still dares to give parenting advice. Surprisingly, with all this, your wife, who has raised 2 children herself, is faced with intrusive and, in her opinion, terrible advice from your mother-in-law. And given that it is your sister who has taken on the role of mother to you and your siblings, her support of your wife's opinion adds weight to her words. You should realize that you have no basis for your complaints. You should recognize that your sister is the woman who actually raised you and your siblings, and she, along with your wife, sees the situation much more clearly. Your denial and unwillingness to accept reality is only making things worse. My next story. My daughter is in grammar school, and recently she faced a serious problem. One of her classmates started to harass her. The situation got so bad that my daughter did not want to go to school. The school responded adequately to the problem, but the boy's mother showed no willingness to resolve the issue and sided with her son. When I tried to discuss the situation with her over the phone, she was very unfriendly and on the last occasion even started yelling at me. My daughter has been going to the same school as this boy for many years, and I always thought he had no father in his life, based on the fact that school records only showed his mother's information, and I had never seen his father at school events. However, I recently learned that the boy regularly spends weekends with his father, who lives in a small rural community in a remote area. I learned from an acquaintance that the boy's parents divorced a year before he entered kindergarten. The mother of the boy who was harassing my daughter told her ex-husband that he was a narcissist and abusive man, and for several years she even had a restraining order against him. I also learned from a staff member that the mom specifically asked the school office and all of her son's teachers to never contact his father on the weekends. Driven by curiosity, I did a little research on social media and managed to find information about the boy's father. Today, when the boy pushed my daughter again on the school playground and she ended up in the nurse's office, I decided to call his father and tell him what was going on without mentioning anything bad about his ex-wife or her way of dealing with the situation. To my surprise, the boy's father turned out to be a very pleasant man. He sincerely apologized and assured me that serious action would follow this weekend and that something like this would not happen again. After talking to me, I had a good impression of him and felt that indeed the necessary intervention would be taken, unlike the reaction of the boy's mom. However, a few hours later, I received an angry text from the boy's mom. She reported that her ex-husband had called her son immediately after our conversation, became angry with him, used harsh words, and bombarded the boy with yelling and threats about how horrible the upcoming weekend would be. After our conversation, the mom revealed that she had received an abusive text message from her ex-husband. He accused her of not being involved enough in their son's life and threatened to expose her alleged shortcomings as a mother on social media. She expressed fears that her ex and his family might start harassing her. She accused me of inappropriately communicating with her ex-husband, expressing gratitude for the drama and painful experiences I had brought into their lives. I realized that my interference may have caused unintentional conflict in their family. As I listened to her, I reflected on the situation. It may have been wrong to contact the other parent, but I was committed to protecting my child's best interests. If her ex was indeed abusive and narcissistic, then perhaps I had put the child at risk. The nature of his behavior and the existence of the restraining order raises questions about his personality and behavior toward loved ones. I am beginning to realize that there may be some truth to the possible allegations regarding this mother's behavior. This is based on her reaction and attitude when I tried to discuss my daughter's bullying situation. Her response was extremely emotional and emphatic, indicating a possible disregard for the real problems in her child's behavior. My attention and concern is primarily for my daughter's well-being and protection. It is important to note that despite the complexities of the other family dynamic, my primary goal is to provide a safe and supportive environment for my child. This means taking steps to protect her from any negative influences and ensuring that she feels secure and confident in the school environment.